Greetings and salutations, friends on YouTube, where today we're going to be talking about what it's like to be bald, a short, shining history of light and beauty.
Your jokes are bad and you should feel
we're
bad.
not
POE.
We're not doing the bald thing?
We want to talk about POE.
Oh, we're
Boo,
2020
big
Heist?
balds, boo.
Okay, we'll do that
your
instead.
beard? Quit with this bald crap.
I mean, people don't want to talk about what life is like being bald?
Hey, you know the only thing worse than being bald is watching your bald face on YouTube.
I thought that'd be an appropriate Christmas topic.
I hope a mirror of Calandra doesn't drop for you. Then we'd be seeing bald and double.
Ho, 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 and Merry Christmas, YouTube. It is I, G3 Iron, and we are here today to talk about our final league of 2020, 3.12 Heist League. We're going to be taking a look back at our memories, both the ups and the downs of what was the final league of the 2020 Path of Exile calendar year. For those of you who are new to the channel, welcome, and for those of you who are veterans, you know that we love our bald jokes, our memes, and of course all of your comments and feedback down below. If at any point throughout the video you would like to reference any of the particular talking points, Reddit posts, or images that we chat about, those will all be linked for you down below in the video description. And since today is a holiday, Christmas, we do have a very special treat on our Discord server today where you're allowed to post memes all day to hopefully bring joyful cheer to everyone across the world in our little POE family. Without any further ado and without any further bald jokes, let's jump into our review of Heist League.
Thank you, everyone, for being on time. We have a lot to cover. The mark is in the rear of the dining hall. Cast, you're up first. You'll need to crack the lock and get us inside.
The story of Heist started when it was, of course, announced on the forums and on the POE website September 1st of 2020. It was then officially released. Its opening weekend was September 18th of 2020 for us PC plebs. Heist was pitched and promised as a stealth league that would engage all of our various senses in order to elude and evade any sort of capture or trouble along the way towards escaping while committing grand larceny and getting out with all kinds of fat loot in the various heists that we would be engaging in. Of course, what was promised wasn't quite what was delivered on, but more on that later on. According to the Steamchart data from what we've got for Heist, Heist was a pretty popular launch with over 120,000 players making peak numbers during its opening month, September of 2020. That's a pretty healthy number when you look back over the last 2 years of Path of Exile releases for Steamchart comparisons. Always remember, whenever you're using Steamcharts, not every player who plays Path of Exile uses Steamcharts. A lot of players use the standalone client, which will not be included in Steamchart numbers. I am one of those players that uses the standalone client, and so players like me and many others would not be included in this data. The story of Heist really is one that is filled with mixed reactions. It's one of the most mixed reviewed leagues of the entire year. I myself am still personally conflicted and have been conflicted up until the time of recording this video about how exactly to recap Heist. There were some incredibly innovative and really awesome suggestions and a really ambitious template for a league to come into Path of Exile and expand the sort of gameplay that players could experience while enjoying their characters in Rayclast. But on the other hand, there were lots and lots of hiccups along the way, including some major hiccups that even led to Grinding Gear Games reevaluating the entire approach to how they're releasing content moving forward. As always, Grinding Gear Games did a great job of trying to communicate with the player base and let us know what was going through their thought process as they were going through a change in themselves. I think it was great how transparent Grinding Gear Games tried to be throughout the entirety of the year, their entire community interaction staff, their PR staff, as well as Chris Wilson himself, lead developer at Grinding Gear Games. I think the entire team has done an exceptional job in the midst of a global pandemic trying to maintain communication and maintain relationship with the player base. That being said, this year was not without its hiccups in communications. One of the biggest hiccups was, of course, the massive change that happened to Heist relatively early on in its league development and in its league iteration. Within the first 2 days of Path of Exile Heist being launched, we essentially had massive changes to the primary mechanics that made Heist go. Regarding future development, Chris included in this particular Reddit and forum thread post that in the future they're hoping to tighten things up and get more organizationally sound, so that way they'll actually have testing time to work on the game internally prior to it getting released. It really sounded awkward, and I feel like this is another one of those low moments of the year for grinding gear games. We've all had them this year, and so, I'll be the first one to say, let he who is without sin throw the first stone. But at the same time, we've got to point out that Grinding Gear Games, in the midst of a really, really tough and challenging year, did a great job trying to communicate with us, but occasionally they missed the mark. And this was one of those moments where all of us were pretty much scratching our heads saying, wait a minute, does this mean that Heist wasn't actually tested internally, and now the league that we're going to be playing from like September 20th and 21st on is not originally what was hyped and what was promised and what was developed? Now, that might be a little bit harsh if that was our opinion today, or if that was our particular takeaway from Heist as an entire league. I'm simply trying to recap where we were at when Chris posted this particular communique about moving forward in future development cycles and what exactly the development process for Heist was like. I am very, very glad that Grinding Gear Games gives us 4 new content releases every single year to tackle, to challenge, and to work through. I know that there's going to be bugs. I know it's not going to be perfect for everyone, and I am very, very glad that with a free-to-play model as a game, we get so much content and so much communication from the company that is making this game. I love that about Grinding Gear Games. Please don't hear what I'm not saying. I'm not saying that Grinding Gear Games has done a terrible job this year or that Heist was a massive failure. I'm simply saying that this was one iteration where we were all as a community scratching our heads and wondering, what exactly was going on with Heist's development that led to Heist being in the state that it was in when it was released. Moving on from Heist's overarching story and development to talking a little bit about Heist Meta, you can see from our 2-week overview of the various player choices for ascendancies that the top spots in terms of ascendancies for Heist were Trickster, Assassin, Necromancer, and Elementalist inside the softcore league for Heist. And one of the big interesting changes that was unique to Heist was really the rise of the Elementalist and Golemancer archetype as becoming a very, very popular archetype throughout the entire course of the league. Of course, this was early enough on in the league that not everybody had tinkered with alternate quality gems and replica uniques yet, and so that's one of the reasons why if you're looking at the meta today in Heist, it's going to look a little bit different than when we did our 2-week overcap. Speaking of replica uniques and alternate quality gems, I personally loved them. I thought that was one of the coolest aspects of the entire league, if not, pretty much the coolest aspect of the league. Basically, for me, conceptually, the coolest part about Heist was going to be like trying to play a stealth game in the midst of an action RPG. I thought that was intriguing as a concept. I thought it was really ambitious. I thought it might be tough to pull off, but I thought, hey, Grinding Gear Games does a great job with a lot of different things conceptually, and they might be able to pull this off. So besides for the whole stealth, larceny side of things, besides that, I thought replica uniques and alternate quality gems had a lot of potential, and they certainly proved to have even more potential than what we thought. Of course, for me, my best character this entire league, my favorite character was somebody using replica Dreamfeather along with Transcendence and simply stacking as much armor as I could using Anomalous Grace and then Divergent Determination. It was incredibly fun. I was able to push this thing up to over 1 million armor while just standing stationary, and then with popping flasks, it was 1.92 million armor. It was incredibly fun. Not the fastest character in the entire league, but it was very, very fun, and I enjoyed the heck out of playing this character. I think the highlight for me, if I was to say the entire league as a highlight, like what was the best moment of the league for me, it was during a streaming session where we were trying to push this armor to as high as we possibly could, and we were finally able, over the course of like an hour or so, to tinker with numbers to go up from 800,000 armor to 900,000 armor to 980,000 armor to 990,000 armor, and then I think we were at like 997,000 at some point. We just had to keep tinkering with jewels and with passives and with purchases, and eventually we got up to the point where we were at for this particular photo capture. My second favorite moment from the entire league was probably watching Mrs. Draconis, my wife, take down Awakener 8 Cirrus using this character. That was another great moment as well. We can't talk about Heist without at least mentioning something about the economy, and so we're going to do that right now. Heist's economy was very, very interesting and unique as an overarching picture of economies compared with previous leagues in Path of Exile. I'm going to show you a couple of charts here with my floaty Merry Christmas head. All right, first off, we've got Harvest, right? You can see that exalted prices over the course of the opening weekend pretty much shoot straight up, and then eventually they migrate down, and then they pretty much taper off to eventually rise a little bit and end right around where they were at in their low point after reaching their high point of the first couple of weeks. Delirium had a little bit different of a story where we saw a steady progression of the value of X to Chaos in terms of the ratio, and then a little bit of a dip, but really not a dip in the same way that Harvest, but again, a pretty steady curve with a slight slowdown in the economy at about the same time, and then eventually ending at about where its low point was after a few weeks. During Metamorph League, it was really interesting because we had, of course, the new various Conquerors Exalted Orbs that were introduced alongside the Conquerors of the Atlas expansion, and players really didn't know how to utilize those in terms of the economy, and so there was some shifting going on in between the ratios of Chaos to X and their values, and so you can see that in the story of the economy above my slightly jingly forehead, where there's ups and there's downs, but again, there's a relative consistency upward turn with an occasional downturn here or there. When you start to look at the overarching picture of the Exalted Orb market over the last several leagues, we start to really get some clarity about what leagues are outliers, economically speaking. Taking a look back at Harvest, Delirium, Metamorph, Blight, Legion, Synthesis, Delve, and Incursion and Betrayal, we really get a picture for exactly what Exalted Orbs look like over the course of an entire duration of a league on average. And generally, the rules of thumb are this. Usually, Exalted to Chaos are between 125C and 200C, and there's only one time that Exalt to Chaos ratios broke that 200C mark, and that was during Blight League, only for a very short period of time. So on the one hand, we've got an outlier with Blight League at the top end, and then Incursion on the opposite end with an outlier on the bottom end, where essentially after week 4 of Incursion, it's a pretty widely known fact. We covered it here on the channel back during Incursion. There was a massive ban wave during the summer, and the economy never picked back up after that. The economy crashed hard, and it had a couple of little blips of players coming back in and players interacting, but for the most part, it did not compare with where the league economy was at for the first 4 weeks of Incursion. So this gives us our two outliers, Incursion and Blight, and then everything else is pretty much in between, with a relative steady rise after the first meteoric first weekend or two of a league start. Then we get to Heist, and you compare Heist to everything else, and you just go, what? Huh? Like, the data doesn't make much sense. And that really is going to get into some of my personal thoughts about Heist as a league mechanic and Heist as a reward mechanic. But first, let's take a look here at the data. Exalted Orbs to Chaos Orbs never went above 109 on average for an entire day, the entirety of the league. I want you to think about that for just a moment. Think about that. We've got data of over 2 years worth of leagues, even where there have been new competitive top-end crafts that have been added to the game, whether that's through Delve fossil crafting or whether that's been through Conquerors Exalteds. We've had new meta crafting available and introduced into the game through Betrayal, where there's new uses and new opportunities for Exalted Orbs to either be used creatively or traded creatively in the entire course of the league. We've had all of these various other sorts of supply kinds of currencies enter into the league and enter into the core of Path of Exile, and yet we've always had this pretty consistent rule. X is going to get up to about 125, and it's going to float somewhere between 125 to 200C. And then with Heist, it never reached 125. It never reached 110 for an entire day. What? This is primarily what has made, in my opinion, Heist such a difficult league to handicap or predict regarding the economy. Now, in the midst of all of that, our G3 Guild Bank, we actually did the best that we've ever done in terms of our profit margins and what we were able to return back to several of our investors. It was a massive success for us. So even though the overall economy had a lot of unprecedented moves, we were still able to adjust to that. So you're not going to hear me complaining about this because we didn't personally make currency and make profit. However, you will hear me simply look at this as a phenomenon and in the future probably refer to it as a just what the heck? Like Heist as an economy and as a reward system was simply massively out of proportion to the rest of Path of Exile as a loot drop based game. So this brings me to my own personal naughty list, as it were, of Heist. Things that would be added to my personal gripes as I look back at Heist and as I hopefully project moving forward, just as a player commenting on the mechanic as a whole. I am of the opinion that top-end loot in Path of Exile should come from skillful choices made at some point. Those skillful choices might be in your build character that you choose, your ascendancy in your character and how you choose to spend your passive points. It might come from clever use of crafting. It might come from clever use of trade. It might come from clever use of different mechanics inside the game. But there should be skillful choices made at some point. And I am not yet convinced, after several months of playing in Heist, that there's any skillful choice involved in generating more currency in Heist than in any other piece of content in Path of Exile right now. It's simply better across the board in Heist, and you can be almost unskillful in your choices and still make more currency and still have more things drop for you. You can run Heist suboptimally and make similar currency running Heist suboptimally to what you could for many other different currency generating strategies, even at their most optimal state. I think that balance needs to be changed moving forward, and to be fair to Grinding Gear Games, they generally do this. Grinding Gear Games generally releases new league mechanics that are super duper rewarding in order to incentivize players to interact with it, and then once players interact with it and give enough balance feedback moving forward, if that core game mechanic goes into the core of Path of Exile, then they balance it around the rest of the loot table. So it's not as though anything that I'm suggesting here is something that Grinding Gear Games hasn't already done, and I really hope they do agree with me on this, that top-end loot and PoE should be the result of some kind of skillful choice rather than haphazard suboptimal running of heists, still pumping out more currency and more loot options than anything else in the game. Oh, by the way, everything that I just said about loot, you can also basically say about XP. There's a couple of things that you can do to run XP heist contracts at a higher ratio than pretty much anything else in the game. I get that Grinding Gear Games is trying to incentivize players to play the new stuff and the new mechanic and to try it out, but I just think that there's way too much XP in a particular heist for what it is that you're doing in Heist. Again, this is personal bias. Feel free to blast me in the comments down below. I didn't necessarily enjoy running those heists and getting the XP that I was getting. It simply felt like the amount of monsters I was killing and the amount of ground that I was covering, the amount of progress that I was making, it didn't feel like it should have been worth that much XP. I don't know how else to describe it. I'm not articulate enough to be able to put it into other words other than it felt wrong that I could run an entire map covering massive amounts of area and killing tons and tons of monsters, or what I felt was tons and tons of monsters, and get way less XP than a similarly leveled zone in a heist. Another gripe is that the league that we've played since September 20th on was not the same conceptual league that was promoted, hyped, or in any way teased. Maybe this was a misunderstanding on my part, and so again, feel free to correct me down below in the comments. I thought we were going to be playing essentially a stealth-based league, and that's what it was released as. That's what I feel like it was launched as on September 18th, and then for some reason, the entire core loop of like alert level and doors and all sorts of chests, all of that basically changed and was tweaked between the release of Friday through Saturday, Sunday, and then Monday. It's almost like we were playing a completely different league. And that personally is a bit frustrating. I still don't have a clue why those things were changed. I've had a couple of people mention some things to me, like, well, it wasn't very friendly for minion players because your minions were going in and were essentially generating alert level without intentionally doing so. And on the one hand, I'm somewhat sympathetic to that. I mean, you'd think I love playing a summoner. I play a summoner, at least one summoner every single league. So you'd think I would be a king of saying yes, advocating and saying, hey, let's make the league more friendly for summoner players. But there's tons of content that's not necessarily friendly to all sorts of archetypes. That's a part of Path of Exile. When you choose a build, you are probably in some way limiting your choices for the most optimal way to play a particular mechanic. And so that to me was confusing. If that's the reason why, it just doesn't add up to me. So again, I'm still confused as to why those changes were made that were made. During the hype cycle and during the lead up to Heist launch, I was incredibly excited. You can go back and look at all of the different preview content if you want that we covered right here at Good Guy Gaming. And I was stoked. I was genuinely stoked. Heist was the league that I was looking forward to the most all year. When we look back over the year, and I've been thinking about it all the course of the last couple of months, and look back and see, hey, what was I actually excited for the most? Delirium really didn't thrill me all that much. And Metamorph, I was more more excited for the expansion than for Metamorph just from the tease. And that also came at the same time as PoE 2. So again, it was tough to get hyped for Metamorph when all this other stuff was out. Harvest, I hoped it was going to be Synthesis 2.0. And so when Harvest eventually came out as Harvest, I was like, meh. But Heist was the one that I was really excited for because I thought it was ambitious. I thought it would essentially add a new layer of gameplay to Path of Exile. And so I was very, very excited about that. I really liked the hype cycle for Heist, and hopefully that came through in our videos and our communication for it. I was really, really stoked for it. And I would still be stoked for that style of gameplay, for that style of approach to adding a new layer or a new style of mechanic that would encourage stealth and evasive sort of gameplay. I think that would be very, very interesting. Another thought from Heist was simply seeing the board, as it were, or the Rogue Harbor. To me, that was like a flashback to Betrayal, and it scared me at first. I eventually bought in because I was like, all right, here's a bunch of stealth guys that we got to level up and engage with. But ultimately, having a second progression system for even more NPCs is not something that is intriguing me for any league, ever. And I'm not going to want to do it every single league. That's going to be out of this world. I already, just because I'm involved in a guild and we've got so many wonderful players in our guild and so many wonderful volunteers who help out with our guild crafting, I already don't unveil all of my own stuff. I go to our guild crafter for that, and I throw all of my veiled stuff towards them because I don't want to be doing that on my own alone every single league. And that's for some very basic crafts. Like veiled crafting is for some very essential stuff, some very build enabling stuff. And if I'm not willing to do that for veiled stuff, I'm certainly not going to do it just because Heist offers me some currency from clicking on chests. I am of the opinion that if you remove the massive rewards and loot from Heist, that you really don't have much that will attract players to content. The things that attract me to Heist content are, of course, partially the rewards, the replica uniques and the alternate quality gems that you can have inside Heist. I think those things are amazing, and they would in and of themselves would tempt me because they're so build enabling to actually interact with Heist and to level up NPCs if that goes core. But again, it's not going to be the loot that is going to make me so excited, just the generic loot, the currency, the items, etc. It's going to be the very specific, targetable, essentially league-tied content, which are replica uniques and alternate quality gems. That's what's going to be rewarding enough to incentivize me to play Heist in the future. I think of it kind of like this. If you take away Breach uniques from Breach, Breach is still Breach, right? You're still going in there and killing a whole bunch of monsters, even if you don't want the Breach splinters, and even if you don't want to go encounter a Breach Lord, and even if you don't want the blessings of whatever Breach Lord it is you could encounter. Even if you don't get to keep your wealth from Delve, like during the Delve event, which was a voided event and none of it went to standard, and so none of it really mattered in terms of any kind of economic purpose, right? And it was all SSF, so you weren't trading it anyway. Even in that scenario, in a Delve SSF scenario, I still played it because I enjoyed the gameplay loop of Delve. When it comes to Blight, there is nothing else in Path of Exile that allows you to have a tower defense simulator style of gameplay in Path of Exile other than Blight. If you want that gameplay, you get it from Blight. Regardless if you're still interested in getting oils or catalysts for your particular build or for trade, you can still go and enjoy Blight for the content that it is. For me, again, I'm not arguing anything for you. I'm not telling you how you need to enjoy Path of Exile. I'm saying for me, there's nothing in Heist except for the rewards that incentivizes me to go play it. If the incentive was supposed to be stealth-based gameplay, well, they killed that after the first 2 days of the league. To summarize my thoughts after Heist League and after I've been done with Heist League now for a couple of weeks, I gotta say, again, there were some really, really high highs as a player during Heist and some really low lows, just as essentially as an observer and as a lover of Path of Exile, as someone who supports the heck out of this game as much as I can. And there were some real low moments throughout the entire course of the year. I would say essentially the changes during Delirium for me personally were a low moment, and then a low moment was when 3.13 got announced as delayed because Grinding Gear Games was reevaluating their approach for content. That happened during Heist. So to divorce Heist League in and of itself from that announcement is really tough for me, because to me that was like a punch in the gut. Right now, as we're watching this video and hopefully enjoying our very Merry Christmases, each in our own homes with our own loved ones, I can't divorce those two things. Right now, we ideally should be able to be playing together 3.13, and we're not, because a game that's a AAA title that has nothing to do with Path of Exile, that's not even the same genre as Path of Exile, was coming out at a similar time. I know that's going to get some pushback and that's going to upset some of you, and some of you are going to love Cyberpunk. Totally fine. I am glad you enjoy Cyberpunk. If you do, I don't give a crap about it. I would love to be playing Path of Exile right now. Also, the fact that GGG has had to restructure their entire development cycle, and Chris Wilson himself was taking the lead on 313, again, that just makes me really nervous about content in the future, and I really hope whatever gets previewed and whatever gets teased for 313 is actually what we get to play. I hope that the league that is conceptually pitched is the league that we're actually able to follow through on and play whenever that does get released. Also, don't think I missed out on the reality that during Heist we had several different patches that added content. Not just patches that fixed bugs, but patches that legitimately added endgame boss encounters to Heist. Now, I've got a couple of thoughts on this. On the one hand, during our review this week while we talked about Metamorph, we said, you know what, Metamorph kind of felt like there was supposed to be an endgame to it, and maybe the team just ran out of time, and so it was like, all right, here's Metamorph, and the end game is going to be Cirrus and the Conquerors. But it still felt like Metamorph had something there to it. Like there was supposed to be some boss encounters that were added at the end of Tane's quest line. With Heist, Grinding Gear Games decided, hey, you know what? We've got these endgame boss encounters, and we're going to add them. They're not going to be available and ready on release, so we'll continue to work on them, and we'll stagger release stuff. To me, I don't enjoy that. I think staggering your content essentially is trying to string along your player base to say, hey, come back in a few weeks. And even if it's not intended to be this, even if there's no intentional design to string players along just for the sake of having player numbers, it can feel that way. It can feel like, okay, come get some content this week, and then in a few weeks get some more content, and then in a few weeks get some more content. To me, I would rather have the entire league delayed, give us the date for when the league is coming out as a whole, and then give us the whole league. I hope that's what's going to happen for 313. 313 has been delayed. I hope there's no staggered releases, and I hope the whole thing is released on launch day for 313. Again, that doesn't mean that there won't be bugs. That doesn't mean there won't be even mechanical changes or thematic changes to the league. Dating as far back as Delve, even as Essence League, even beyond that with Prophecy, there's almost always tweaks and changes that have to get made to mechanics. Thinking back about Bestiary, we used to have to throw nets manually. Thinking back about Delve, there were several different things that we had to do for Delve. And thinking about Metamorph, right? We had to go and click manually on organs. And so there are several things that we've seen change with mechanics that are quality of life changes. That's not really what I'm saying I don't want to see happen. I like seeing those quality of life improvements come to the league. A quality of life improvement that could have really simply come to the entire league would have been figuring out some way, someone internally to say, hey, how about if we don't make this door league? How about if Heist League is actually about being a heist rather than about doors? I forget who it was who made the original suggestion. I wish I could credit them. Feel free to claim it as your original suggestion down below. Someone had made the idea that Heist really should start with us at the reward room at the end of a heist and then having to fight our way out of the entire encounter. I think that would be a massive, massive shift to what the player experience is in Heist. You wouldn't have to deal with any of the doors getting in. Essentially, you've just got to get out, and it's okay if you butcher everything on the way out. I think that is such a brilliant suggestion to Heist moving forward. I really hope GGG takes something of that. Well, I hope you've enjoyed our discussion today on this very Merry Christmas about Heist. I want to thank you so much for all of your comments over the last week as we've been looking back over the course of 2020 at the various leagues that have come out. I'd love to hear down below in the comments what your thoughts were about all of these various things that have happened during Heist League. I feel like Heist League really has had a lot of highs and a lot of lows, so there's a lot to comment on. So feel free to drop me a long line down below, and if you want to include a summary too long, don't read, that's okay. I'll still get to it. It's Christmas. I want to talk POE, and I hope you do as well. Secondly, I'd also love to hear what would you miss from Heist if GGG came out tomorrow and said, you know what, guys, we just got to hold off on Heist. It's not coming core, at least right now. What would you miss most about Heist? For me, it would definitely be the alternate quality gems and the replica uniques and the various builds that they enable, because there are a ton of them, and I don't even think we've scratched the surface yet. I think alternate quality uniques are not the same in terms of power level to what cluster jewels are from Delirium, but I think in terms of build diversity, they might be, and so I think that's something that I would miss. But feel free to drop me a comment down below, and I hope that 313 is the league when a Mirror of Calandra drops for you. Merry Christmas, everybody. Thanks for watching that video. If you'd like more information on any of our discussion points today, you can see them down below in the video description. If you'd also like to join our Discord or support our Patreon, you can do so with the links down below. Thanks again, and big shout out to all of our Patreon supporters.